Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. And today we're going to be talking about an absolutely wild case. Morgantown is known for something terrible, and that's the story of Skylar Neese. She was born on February 10th, 1996, and these are her parents, Mary and Dave Neese. Mary worked as an assistant in Cardiac Lab, and Dave was a product assembler at Walmart. And Skylar was an extremely loved child. She was their only child, though that meant that she was everything for them. Mary and Dave said that Skylar was a very sweet child. She loved to play outside, she loved animals.
Personality-wise, what was she like?
A little nymph.
Yeah, exactly. She was energetic. She was positive. She was kind.
Very bubbly.
Bubbly.
Always.
Yeah. She had a smile that could light up a room. And package those all into one little 16-year-old girl, and you got Skylar.
Loved to tease and pick.
Yeah.
Prankster.
Yeah, she had a sense of humor, that's for sure. Ask Aunt Carol.
Skylar was growing up and she met a lot of new people, and she met Shaylia when she was 8. And they became very, very close. In one interview, Dave said that she was like a part of our family. She really was. I mean, just like one of our kids. Shaylia's parents got divorced when she was 4 years old, and her dad also was disabled, so he couldn't work. So it was pretty stressful for her, and she was also an only child, just like Skylar. So the two of them really bonded over that. Mary and Dave really wanted to be as welcoming as they could to Shaylia. They would have her over all the time for dinners, play dates, all that stuff, sleepovers. She was so used to coming to their house that she would just walk right in, and they were fine with that. Skylar's family lived in an apartment in Star City. Skylar really enjoyed playing with Shaylia. She was definitely a fun person to hang out with. She was a bit of a wild child, and I think that was interesting to Skylar. The girls went to different schools, but when they got into high school, Shaylia ended up transferring to University High School, which is where Skylar went. And they were really excited. And she really liked high school. She did really well in school, actually. Teachers liked her, and she had high hopes one day of becoming a lawyer. And you will hear what her mother said about this.
She said,
Lawyer.
yeah, she wanted to be a criminal lawyer. And she would constantly, do you think I'd make a good lawyer, Mom? And of course, Dave and I, or she'd say Dad, whichever. And we'd say, the way you argue, oh, you'd be an excellent doctor or lawyer. And she did every time you would tell her no. She would argue, but why? But why? And you'd give a reason. Well, that doesn't make sense, but why? And even if you broke it down, it was still a, but why?
Tell me why. And when she got mad, it was tell me why.
Yeah, and you couldn't get away with, because I'm the parent and I said so. No, you had better have a reason why.
If you didn't, then...
Yeah. And she wanted to be the lawyer.
Yeah,
She
well,
wanted-
first thing she wanted to be a checkout clerk at Walmart. Remember when she was
Yeah,
really
but that
little?
was grade school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She thought that was really cool, scanning stuff and getting the beeps.
But she was going to be married. Oh, Lord, can I get the age right? She was going to be, I think she said by 25. This stuff was all supposed to be accomplished. I might be wrong on the age. But she wanted to be the lawyer. She was going to be married. She was going to have 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. She was going to live in this big fancy house. I said, well, with these kids and that kind of profession, how are you going to keep the house clean? You going to hire a maid? Well, no, Mom. You're going to move in and clean the house and cook for me because you're a good, she always said, a good cooker. I was a good cooker, so I was going to cook and clean for her. I was like, okay.
She was a responsible kid. She also had a job in high school. She worked in the fast food restaurant, Wendy's, where friends worked as well and really liked the job. So at school, she was definitely known as a confident and maybe we can say popular girl. At this point, Shayla's parents got remarried and she really liked her stepdad. So she was feeling more comfortable in her home life than ever before. And now Skylar and Shayla were spending a lot of time together, so they were getting a lot closer. And they were thrilled to be in the same school. And eventually Skylar and Shayla added a third person to their group. During their freshman year, they met Rachel Shove. Rachel's parents were divorced. She had an older half-brother that she didn't grow up with. So, like Skylar and Shayla, she was raised as an only child. Before high school, Rachel went to a private school and she was sheltered by a wealthy religious family. And people who know are said that she really seemed to like attention. She loved being in the school plays and she wasn't just in the school plays. She was normally the star of the school plays. And the 3 of them were really, really close. If they weren't actually physically together, they were texting into Twitter as well, so they were constantly talking to each other. A lot of people say that they acted more like sisters than friends. They were really, really that close. To a lot of people, it seemed like nothing could ever break their friendship apart. And Mary and Dave, they were really happy that Skylar had such close friends. But eventually, over time, they started having some intergroup jealousy. Rachel and Shayla seemed to be a lot closer, and Skylar seemed to be left out and was often feeling alone. By summer of 2012, Shayla and Rachel were really close, and Skylar definitely felt a little bit left out. And on July 1st, 2012, Skylar was home alone because Rachel and Shayla had made plans and didn't invite her. And obviously that was really upsetting. So that day she was mopping around, feeling sad, feeling lonely, feeling left out. And her mom has suggested that maybe she read a book or do some homework. Because Skylar was a very, very smart student. She was an honor student. She absolutely loved to read. She really liked to read classics and so on. So her mother thought that this is something that she would want to do to make the time go by. But not even that sounded fun to Skylar. On that day, she just felt really down. And that day she actually tweeted out, "Sick of being at fucking home, thanks friends." So it was clear that Skylar was hurt by Shayla and Rachel making plans without her. So the next night, July 5th, 2012, Skylar worked her shift at Wendy's until about 10 p.m. And when she got home, her parents were in the living room, just watching TV, having a very casual night. She walked in, took a peek at what they were watching, hung out for a second, and then gave them both a kiss, good night, and went up to bed. However, Skylar actually had some other plans. she decided that she was gonna be sneaking out at night. So about 12:30 a.m. on Friday, July 6th, Skylar snuck out of her house through her bedroom window. She used a small bench on the ground under the window to help her climb out, and she took a bunch of her regularly carried items with her purse, her cell phone, her wallet, and there is actually video that we can see of her leaving the apartment complex at 12:31 a.m. And you can see in this clip that she's walking through the parking lot across the street to the car. This car is waiting for her, and she gets into the back seat and they drive away. Now, sneaking out was something that Skylar had been doing more of lately. She had definitely started to rebel a little bit more. The three of them loved to go across the Pennsylvania border to Star City to smoke weed. They had just discovered that, and they had always gotten really into drinking, smoking, or something like this. She was getting in trouble sometimes, as people do, and a lot of what they were concerned about, what was being posted on the internet. All three of the girls were very, very active on Twitter. Rachel and Skylar were big into Twitter, but honestly not as much as Shayla. She tweeted probably twice as much as both of them combined. She wrote there about her feelings and so on. So all three girls, they were definitely rebelling, and Skylar's other friends outside of these two started to notice and didn't like Shayla for this reason. They thought that she was a little too wild. She seemed to always be pushing the limits too far. Skylar's other friends saw that Shayla was a terrible influence on her. And her parents noticed that Rachel's a bad influence, her friends noticed that Shayla's bad influence, and Skylar's friends say that they even felt like Skylar was being changed by the two of them, that her personality was being altered. And when her other friends tried to talk to her about it, she just dismissed it. She thought that they were totally out of line and that it wasn't true. Plus, her and Shayla had been friends since Skylar was a kid. She looked up to her like a sister, and Rachel was really close with Shayla too, and really liked her. And Rachel, she had a lot of friends, a lot of other friends, but she really liked Shayla. And Rachel's other friends started to feel the exact same way that Skylar's other friends did, that Shayla was a bad influence on Rachel. They tried to talk to her, but Rachel didn't care. She saw that Shayla was such a cool person and nothing was gonna stop her from being friends with her. In school, there were some rumors spreading around that Rachel and Shayla actually were starting to have a relationship. A lot of people thought that's why Rachel was so defensive of Shayla. She didn't want anyone to talk badly about her ever, but no one knew if this was actually true, because Shayla and Rachel, they had boyfriends. But the two of them did seem really, really close. And eventually, they just started to push Skylar away. They would make plans without her all the time. They would dress like each other to make her jealous, like plan their outfits to make her feel left out. And all during sophomore year, Skylar and Shayla were fighting way more than usual. And it seemed like Rachel, she was driving them apart. And Skylar, She, of course, vented her frustrations on Twitter. She said, I'd tell the whole school all of the shit I have on everyone, which is a lot. So, jumping back to the morning of July 6th, Skylar snuck out at 12:30 a.m. That morning, Mary and Dave got ready for work like normal as usual, and they assumed that Skylar was in her room. She said that she was gone to bed early that night before, and Dave had planned to go to his shift to the Walmart and come back and give Skylar his car so that she could take it to her shift at Wendy's. So he got home midday as planned, and he went to Skylar's room. But when he got to her door, he realized that the door was locked, which was unusual. Sometimes Skylar locked her door for privacy, but it wasn't something she did very often and not normally in the middle of the day. But Dave think too much of it, so he started knocking, calling for her. Skylar, are you in there? And she didn't answer. And when he didn't hear anything, he instantly just got a wave of fear. It's one thing if you can tell your kids ignoring you or locking you out, you can hear a little sound, a breath, something. But he could hear absolutely nothing. So he went outside of the door, outside of the house, to the window so he can look in. And when he got there, he saw the small bench on the ground from when Skylar snuck out, and he saw that the window was open. So, of course, any dad's gonna put this together right away. Skylar clearly snuck out. But of course, since it's now the daytime, Dave starts freaking out immediately because he figures something could have happened. Because if she did sneak out and she's still not back by now, especially because her shift at Wendy's was coming up, and she's a very responsible girl, she's gonna show up for her shift. So, of course, the first thing he thinks of to do is to call her friends and see if they know where she is. So he calls Shaylia, and she said that she had talked to Skylar around midnight the night before, but she hadn't heard from her since. She also said that she had no idea where she was and didn't even have an idea of where she could be. So Dave phoned Mary, and Mary just told him to stay calm. But of course, Mary was still concerned and she came home. And when she did get home, they actually got a call from Wendy's saying that Skylar hadn't showed up for work. And at this point, they say that panic set in for both of them truly, because they knew that she wouldn't just miss work. She was too responsible. This is out of character for her. And the fact that she had snuck out the night before was just so concerning. So, of course, they contact the police right away. They contacted the Star City Police to report Skylar missing.
County 911, do you have an emergency?
I have a 16-year-old daughter who apparently snuck out of her room last night. She has not been home, hasn't went to work, can't get a hold of her from any of her friends. I am scared to death.
Has she done this before?
And two of them started panicking. They start phoning friends and relatives, alerting them about what is going on right away, trying to think of where Skylar possibly could have gone. And not too long into all of this panic, Shaylia actually calls back. And this time she admitted that she and Rachel picked up Skylar at 11 p.m., which probably isn't true because we saw the surveillance footage that showed 12:31 a.m. and they said they hung out with her for like an hour and then they dropped her off a little ways down the street an hour later. And then, right after that, Shalia and her mother ended up coming to the Neese's house to help look for Skylar right away. So Shalia, Tara, and Mary went on one side of the street, knocking on doors, while Dave and the officer took the other side. And they asked everyone in the neighborhood if they had seen anything, if they had heard anything, maybe in the middle of the night, if they had any security cameras installed or inside, they could have possibly picked something up. And of course, at this point, Dave and Mary and the police haven't seen the surveillance footage of Skylar leaving at 12:31, which doesn't make sense with Shalia's story. But suddenly, Mary remembered that the apartment complex had just installed new cameras on the buildings, and they had to have been working. So they went to the landlord and he took them into their office right away and they started looking at these footages. They watched the footage of Skylar crossing the parking and getting into a vehicle. And at this point, they have no idea who this vehicle belongs to. The footage is so grainy, they can't make out who's in it. And they thought the car actually was an SUV. So, of course, as soon as the police see this footage, they think that Skylar is just a runaway, that she's unhappy with her home, and that she probably left just as somewhere. And her disappearance at this point didn't qualify for an Amber Alert. At this point in time, all 4 of the following criteria has to be met before an Amber Alert could be issued. A child had to have believed to be abducted. The child is under 18. The child may be in danger or death or serious injury, and there is sufficient information to indicate that the Amber Alert would be helpful. Plus, when this was all going on, there were still some things around the whole wait for 48 hours to file a missing person report, which in most places that is nothing as things anymore. But that's not true, so Dave and Mary, they were trying their best to convince the police that Skylar wouldn't just run away and not come back. Yes, she was sneaking out, but she loved her life. She was so close with her parents, she was a happy kid. This wasn't in her character to just leave and to stay gone. But of course, the police refused to listen to them really, so Mary and Dave, they felt like had to take matters into their own hands. So they printed out flyers with her picture, her description, and what she was wearing this last night, and put them all up across the country where they could. Rachel and Shalia were devastated about Skylar being gone. They were very, very concerned. Shalia, according to Mary and Dave, seemed to be the most concerned. They said that she would call them often, just asking for updates on the investigation over and over, and would say, I I had some more information. I wish I knew something. I wish I could help and so on. So she was really cooperative. She asked to volunteer to search, to pass out flyers. She basically said whatever she could do. She was willing to do, just let her know. So Mary and Dave felt like, wow, Skylar has a very good friend in Shelia. She cares about her a lot. And they were feeling love because so many people just were devastated about Skylar being missing. They couldn't believe that she would run away, knew that she didn't run away, knew that something had to be wrong. One day, just a few days after Skylar had first gone missing, Shelia actually went up to Skylar's room, sat on her bed, and was just sobbing. Mary walked in and they had a nice moment together. They hugged and they were trying to support each other, and it was horrifying. Luckily, on June 9th, 2012, things started to get taken a little more seriously by law enforcement. The fact that Skylar isn't still there, and after looking more into her background, they realized that this is really out of her character. So luckily, the West Virginia State Police and the FBI joined search, and they interviewed Shelia just days after Skylar was first reported missing. Now, what's really interesting is as soon as the investigator did her first interview on Shelia, she instantly felt like something was wrong. Her first read of Shelia was that she was a narcissist. Not only that, she also described her as wrong. On the other hand, Rachel had gone on a boating trip with her mother on July 6th, the day when the Skylar had gone missing. And her mother was on the trip and her mom's friend was on the trip, and they both noticed that on her ankle and thought that it was really strange. And on the following day, on the 7th, Rachel actually had to go to church camp, so they had to interview her via phone. And when they talked to her, they said that she was just very nonchalant. She was relaxed, saying, I don't really know where Skylar is. But she didn't seem as panicked as Shelia did. And she would also just say, Shelia knows more than me. Talk to Shelia, I don't really know much. She just was short about it, but she did agree to come in for an in-person interview, which is obviously crucial as soon as she was back from church camp. But when Rachel got home from church camp, she didn't just come in right away, which you'd think that this would be a high priority for you. Your friend is missing, you'd probably be really concerned and wanting to help in any way you can. But the investigators actually had to track her down for the interview. It wasn't easy, and as soon as she brought her in, she said pretty much the exact something as she said on the phone, almost word for word at some points. And it started to seem really scripted because Shelia's story was the same as Rachel's. So, of course, investigators looked into as much as they could. Social media, computers, even Skylar's journal to see if there were any clues. And the last entry that Skylar had made in her journal was actually from a year before she went missing, and in it she talked a lot about Shelia. She would talk about how Shaylia could get away with anything and that Shaylia got all the attention from the boys, and Skylar also seemed to be very fascinated with Shaylia. She wrote in detail about Shaylia's sex life, and again, this is Shaylia's sex life that she's writing about in her journal, and she's writing a lot about it, very detailed. So investigators continue to search Skylar's social media, especially her Twitter, for some clues. And they saw that after her Wendy's shift on July 5th, she actually tweeted twice. Once that you doing shit like this is why I will never completely trust you. And another, all I do is hope. People started speculating that she ran away, and maybe she ran away even with a boyfriend or something like this. The rumors was that she robbed a bank, and so she was on the run. There was really a bank robbed in Blacksville about a week before Skylar disappeared, and again about 10 days later. The younger brother of one of the suspects had dated with Shaylia, so they saw there was some type of connection. And he was also a person of interest in Skylar's case. But Dave and Mary, they knew that Skylar definitely didn't run away. Skylar left a lot of important things. If you were really running away, you probably would have taken such things with you. Out of all Skylar's friends and people, they were really upset over Skylar being gone. They were experiencing depression, anxiety, fear of what was going on, wondering where she was. But it seemed that Shaylia was one of the people, if not the person having the hardest time with it. She posted on Facebook, "Skylar, come back. I seriously can't deal with school without you. I miss you so much." And Skylar's dad, Dave, actually responded to her and said, "She will be home soon, honey. Love you." And Shaylia said, "Love you too." And after a while, it started to seem weird. And not only that, rumors at the school, they were kicking up that Rachel and Shaylia had something to do with Skylar's disappearance. A rumor also spread that Skylar had overdosed and that maybe Rachel and Shaylia had hidden her body or something like this because they were afraid. Maybe they thought it was their fault and they were just afraid. And it wasn't just in school. Such rumors, they were also spreading online. This case got a lot of attention online. And police, they were definitely starting to have their suspicions about Shaylia and Rachel. And finally, on September 3rd, warrants were issued to seize all of the electronic devices and communications of Shaylia and Rachel. The police started feeling really confident that they were on the right track, that Shaylia and Rachel, they knew something. And maybe there really was some type of accident and they didn't want to get in trouble, or they were covering for Skylar in some way. But then on October 2nd, 2012, Shaylia posted a picture of her and Skylar on the Team Skylar Facebook page that was created. And Shaylia and Rachel, they were definitely starting to feel the heat, and the amount of people that thought that they had done something was starting to increase over the time. And eventually, things on Twitter got pretty tense. 2 Twitter accounts, they were created and they both started following Rachel and Shayla. When police started reviewing the security footage again, they realized that Shayla had never picked up Skylar at 11 p.m. So they tried to pull security footage from other places that Shayla say that they had went over that hour when they had picked her up. And once they saw footage from a convenience store where they were at, they realized that the car that had picked Skylar up at 12:30 was actually Shayla's Toyota Camry. So, of course, now they know that Shayla and Rachel were lying. They couldn't figure out why, so they created personal line and posted as someone just attending to high school, and they could keep tabs on what the girls were posting, and they read through thousands of posts on Facebook and Twitter, constantly having to search the internet to decode the hashtags they were using, the shorthand that they were using, and they said that it didn't take long for them to become incredibly suspicious of Shayla. She was tweeting all this stuff about getting drunk, about skipping school, about partying. She had tons of tweets about that. But then she randomly would have one and they're like, "I miss you, Skylar. Please come back home." However, they kept bringing Shayla and Rachel in, kept asking questions, trying to get a real read on them. But their story had never changed. They were very much in think about what they said was happening that night. And they noticed that the 2 girls, they were very different. Rachel seemed very nervous, very reserved while she was being interviewed. But Shayla, she was very cheerful, very upbeat, very confident. And according to the investigators, it seemed like she was flirting with some of them at one point. Shayla seemed to want to stay as close to investigation as possible. She was always asking for them to keep her updated for any new information, constantly saying how she wishes she knew more information. However, Rachel took approach. She really just stayed away from the whole thing and seemed nervous about it. She also kept her distance from Mary and Dave, which was very different from the approach that Shayla was taking. She was constantly talking to Mary and Dave, using them as support. So by winter 2012, police were starting to get a little closer to the truth. Using other security camera footage from various locations, they were able to piece together the fact that the girls had driven to Blackswell the night the Skylar disappeared, which Rachel and Shayla had both originally denied. But their phone records show that the girls were texting Skylar when they claimed that she was with them, which makes no sense. Every time that they would interview Rachel, she seemed really nervous, like she didn't want to get in trouble, and they were really sticking to their same stories. The 2 of them were very much on the same page about what happened that night, until one interview where Rachel told them something completely different. She claimed that Skylar had ran off into the woods that night, and she said that she and Shayla tried to run after her, tried to find, but she was gone. So obviously this is a huge change from original story, and they immediately call Sheila to ask her if she has the same story, and of course now she does. So it's very obvious that girls are communicating and planning out what they're going to tell the police. So by mid-December, they decided they need to give both of these girls a polygraph test and see if they can get something out of that. So Sheila was hard to fail this test, and of course it was time for Rachel to take her test, and on the way she jumps out of the car and runs to Sheila's house to get help from Sheila's mom. And now apparently Sheila's mom had been really trying to slow down the investigation. She got in a fight with one of the investigators, Jessica. So it's all really starting to make a picture. They really starting to put the pieces together of what may have happened, and they're definitely thinking at this point something happened. Something happened and it was an accident, and probably these girls, they are covering it. And on December 16th, 2012, Mary wrote a very long Facebook message about Skylar's disappearance, and in that post she talked about how Rachel and Sheila had lied, and she also implied in the message that Skylar was most likely dead. It was clear how they were starting to feel. People were really starting to turn on Rachel and Sheila, though this was having a major mental toll on Rachel and not so much on Sheila. She just didn't seem to care much, but Rachel, she was really struggling mentally. Rachel's parents, they were really worried about their daughter's mental health, and they wanted to distance her from Sheila as it possible, and they felt like she was the terrible influence on the Rachel. And one day when Rachel returned home, she saw her dad and he was living with them now. She was really upset about this fact, and she started running around the neighborhood, screaming and crying. Her mom, she tried to calm her down, but none helped her, and they phoned to the police. And there you can actually hear how Rachel is screaming in the background.
I have an issue with a 16-year-old daughter of mine. I can't control her anymore. She's screaming. She's running through the neighborhood. Give me the phone. Joe, this is over. This is over. Hurry up. Oh, God. Hurry up, please.
When she finally met up with the officers, they took her on polygraph test. After seeing how burned out she was, the police felt like they were gonna get the truth from her. They felt like guilt had just broken her down, and though they started interviewing, thinking this is going to last a while and gonna be difficult to get the full story out of her. But only a few questions, and Rachel shocked them all by saying, "We stabbed her." Rachel and Sheila stabbed Skylar Neese to death. This wasn't even something they were considering. Now they are dealing with murder, and then she just starts to spill everything. She told them how Skylar and Shalia, they usually spend together spring break, and that on their last trip, girls had fought the entire time, and when they got back, Shalia complained to Rachel about how bad Skylar was, how much she didn't like her anymore, and how she had to go. Shalia on the 4th and 5th didn't tweet at all, which was pretty unusual for her. And when they looked back at messages, they saw that on July 5th, Rachel and Shalia had texted Skylar, asking her to sneak out with them that night. And at first, Skylar wasn't so sure. It actually took her a little while to agree to join them. So Shalia picked her up that night, and Rachel was sitting in the passenger seat. Skylar got picked up around 12:30. She gets in the back of the car, and of course the girls didn't realize that there was surveillance video, so they didn't think that out too well. They drove 25 minutes away from Star City, and their plan was originally to take Route 19 to Route 7 to get to Blacksville, but Shalia ended up changing their course when she saw a state police car parked at an intersection. But eventually they did get into Blacksville, they crossed into Pennsylvania, and then Shalia drove them down to the dark road, and they would come there to smoke weed with Skylar. So this wasn't unusual to Skylar at all. According to Rachel, they talked for a few minutes in the car, and then they got out. And when they got to their smoking spot, Skylar realized that she had left the lighter in the car. So she turned around toward the car to get it and started walking that way, when suddenly Shalia and Rachel counted out 1, 2, 3, and on 3, both girls pulled out kitchen knives that they had taken from their parents' house and started stabbing Skylar. Skylar started screaming, of course, completely shocked, but realizing what was going on immediately. And she had been stabbed in the knee, so she tried to run, but she couldn't. According to Rachel, she fell backwards and stopped stabbing her, and that Shalia just kept going. They let her slowly bleed out in front of them, and they literally stood back, the two of them, and watched her slowly die. And according to Rachel, all Skylar could say before she died was just the question why, which is what all of us would like to know. They waited until Skylar had died and it became completely silent. And Rachel and Shalia, they had stopped Skylar over 50 times. And Rachel talked about how much they had premeditated this. They had packed up all the gear that they would need in their car, including paper towels, rags, bleach, clean clothes, even a shovel, and they had all of this in the trunk of their car. So their next move was to get that shovel and try to dig a hole so that they could bury her out there. But as they started to dig, they realized that the ground was too hard and rocky and they couldn't make a hole. So instead, they put her body just under the tree and covered with the dirt, branches, and just random things they could find. And after that, they just turned off Skylar's phone and left it next to her body. After this, they washed themselves and then they walked back to their car where they had fresh change of clothes, got in the car like everything was normal and went home. On their way home, they dumped all the rags, all the evidence that they had, and they got back to their houses around 6 a.m. That morning, Shaylia hops on her Twitter and says this always keep you cool. So, of course, after Rachel just tells them all this, the officers, they were completely shocked. They knew that there was probably a chance that the girls were involved, that they knew something, they were covering up something, but they didn't consider that they had plotted a murder and killed her in such a violent way. So, of course, they asked her just why, and Skylar even was asking why, and this is unbelievable, but they literally said that they did it because they didn't like her. They said they didn't want to be friends with her anymore, and this was the only way to get rid of her. Rachel claimed that it was as simple as that. So, of course, police, they don't even know where to start because they don't even have a body. So the first thing they are asking is, hey, do you remember where you put her body? Can you lead us to it? And Rachel, she agreed. So they went out there to where she saw they had dumped the body, but the area had been completely covered by snow. And Rachel couldn't remember exactly where they put the body, so they had to wait until it melted. So on January 1st, 2013, police looked in Shaylia's car and they found blood in her trunk. Shaylia was a pretty smart girl and she caught quickly that she was sinking. Just after snow melted in the area, police were able to search the wooded area that Rachel had told them about, and of course they did testing to make sure that this was really Skylar, but this was indeed Skylar's body. She was just left out there on the ground by her friends. So through the rest of the winter and spring, the police made Rachel and Shaylia homeschooled. They never saw each other, and on February 10th, Skylar's birthday, Rachel made a happy birthday Twitter post to Skylar, and then after that she tweeted that she had the sheets she think about at night. On March 13th, they announced the public in a press release that the body had been found in Pennsylvania, and the public was just devastated because people were really invested in this case. People were just really hoping that she would be found, that there would be a better outcome, especially kids at the school. Skylar wasn't missing, she was murdered. However, at this time, the girls were still technically under investigation, so even though a lot of people in the community were already suspicious that Rachel and Skylar had something done with her death, and Shaylia was trying to publicly maintain her innocence. On April 1st, 2013, a month before she was arrested, Shaylia seemed to confess to her crimes through Twitter, and in the morning on April 1st, she tweeted, "We really did go on 3. The fact that they are so proud of this, like it's something cool, is really horrible." The next afternoon, she tweeted again saying, "They say you remember the past better than it really was." Meanwhile, they got the results back from Shaylia's car, and the blood there belonged to Skylar Neese, so that officially sinks her ship. And on the day Shaylia was arrested, she was actually just chilling with her mom, and the police was waiting, but then they arrested her for first-degree murder. Now the media had been covering the story all along. The public was very interested, and Dave and Mary, they were doing as much press as they could. But once the arrests happened, the coverage just bombed. It was non-stop. People in the school knew that once Rachel was arrested, then Shaylia was probably involved too. People put the pieces together extremely quick, and as soon as Shaylia was charged as an adult, her name was released to the public and people went wild online. Shaylia is a very hated person online. Shaylia was even smiling at some points in court, and she seemed very worried about her appearance. So on January 24th, 2014, Shaylia did plead guilty to first-degree murder, but even her lawyer say, "I couldn't find any reasonable explanation for her actions." This is a clear, premeditated first-degree murder, period. So finally, 18 months after she murdered Skylar Neese in cold blood, Shaylia was sentenced in prison. There is one positive outcome from this whole situation, is that Skylar's law, and this law actually changed West Virginia's criteria for putting an Amber Alert, and basically now an immediate Amber Alert will be put out to the public even if the child isn't suspected of being kidnapped. But talking about Dave and Mary, how can their life ever be happy again? But luckily they are still together, they have each other, and they seem to have a really good, supportive relationship, which is wonderful to see. But this has broken their hearts in a way that can never be repaired. They made the area where Skylar's body was found into a real nice memorial area with a bench, with some stone. They put flowers there, they decorated through the holidays, and it's just a nice place for them to come and reflect. And for some of Skylar's friends,
well, the memorial in the beginning, I just wanted a simple little bench so I could sit out there. I made the mistake of posting that on Facebook. Well, you saw it, what it's become. And you can't take that away from people.
They wanted to do it.
If they care that much about her, how can we say no? We can't. I can't, and I know Dave can't either.
She's been called Morgantown's princess, Morgantown's sweetheart, everything
Yes.
in the world. And people feel that way about her. I don't want to tell them no. I mean, because they feel like they're doing something special. And they are, you know. And
Yeah. And like I said, the original idea was to be our sanctuary. So it's strayed away from the original plan or idea, but you know, it's all good. Everyone that goes out there says, you know, they feel that presence, that peace, that calm out there. And you just can't take that away from them. Yeah.
It's a place for everybody to go, you
Yeah.
know?
It is.
You know, that girl that so many people have written to me, including that girl that had the purple folder, that said that when they're there, they just feel so good. So, you know, you can't take that away.
No.
It's not ours, you know, it doesn't belong to us. Skylar belonged to us, but she really didn't belong to us. She's her own person,
Yeah.
so she's, you know, it's just put there because Skylar was a really special girl, and people go out there to honor her, you know.
So they turned a place where the horrible situation happened into somewhere really beautiful that they can heal. Friends, hope you are safe. Thank you for watching this video and see you the next time. Ciao!